That led me to my plowshares action in 1993, when I walked onto this huge military base in North Carolina, right through the middle of thousands of soldiers with 3 friends. We came up to one of the big F-15E nuclear fighter bombers. Right in the middle, 4 in the morning, all these soldiers, we each pulled out a little hammer, and I went up to the side of it, and I swung once on this big fighter bomber. Didn't even chip the paint. And for that act, I faced 20 years in prison. Convicted of 2 felony charges, and the U.S. government has told me repeatedly that I'm as high up a terrorist as you can get in the United States. And I just say, you know, in the Bible, you all read the Bible, Holy Prophet Isaiah says someday these people are going to come along and beat their swords into plowshares and study war no more. And Jesus gave that famous commandment, which I just told you. Love your enemies, don't nuke them. That's the actual Greek translation. That's what I told the judge. It didn't go over very well. I was in a little tiny jail cell about this big for 9 months. I was expecting about 5 years. And it was really a horrific experience, but it was also a very rich, powerful experience of God, really. And then the judge sentenced me to 10 months under house arrest with the Jesuits in Washington, D.C., which I wrote in the book, was Cruel and Inhuman Punishment. You know, the Jesuits will read the book. So. Then I worked at the Fellowship of Reconciliation, led a delegation of Nobel Peace Prize winners to Iraq, trying, like you, everything I can to work for peace and justice. And was working in New York City when September 11th happened, and ended up becoming the coordinator of the chaplains at the Family Center, where we had 50,000 direct relatives come through, and we had over 600 chaplains working. And I helped out at Ground Zero, while I was also organizing with friends demonstrations in Times Square and Union Square against the evil bombings of the children of Afghanistan, trying to do both. And the New York Times wrote about me. And the Jesuits had so many complaints from benefactors that I got called in and kicked out of New York for my work for peace by the church, which has happened throughout my life. And I tell you this because it's not easy speaking up for peace. People get really upset with you, your family, your friends, your church friends. They told me, you have 3 months, you have to leave, and you've got 3 months to leave, or we're sending you to teach sophomore religion in Philadelphia. It didn't sound pretty good to me, so I moved to New Mexico, where I am now. It's the poorest state in the country, #1 in military spending, #1 in nuclear weapons, worst in everything. Drunk driving, domestic violence, #1 in suicide, and yet it's so beautiful. And yet at Los Alamos, there are more millionaires per capita than any place on the planet. And we're building a whole new generation of nuclear weapons. So we started a church campaign there to close Los Alamos. And that hasn't gone too well. The Archbishop is in the process of trying to kick me out. But you do what you can. That's my show. So I was thinking, when you think about your life of peace and nonviolence, I always thought maybe there was some big turning point, and maybe that's the way you think about your life. And then I realized, no, and I wrote this in the book, the journey's the thing. To stay faithful to the journey of the spiritual life of walking the road to peace, working for a new world of peace and justice, toward God's reign of peace and justice, toward the God of peace, and practicing nonviolence. And maybe that's what I like most now about Mahatma Gandhi and Dorothy Day and Dr. King and all our heroes. They were faithful, come what may. They did what they could, and they didn't give up the journey. And they leave the outcome in God's hands. And I just find that so beautiful, and that's what I want to do. And for years I worked as the director of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, the largest interfaith peace group in the world. And I found out, for you students, I invite you to ponder this for the rest of your lives, that nonviolence is at the heart of every major religion. That it's not what the government is teaching us. So that Judaism has this spectacular vision of shalom, and Hinduism is embodied by Gandhi, and Buddhism is trying to be compassionate toward all beings, and Islam, the word means peace. Many radical Muslims committed to nonviolence because of the Quran, which is contrary to what we're told. But I want to propose, just for a minute, the possibility that even Christianity is about nonviolence. Now hold on a second. Mahatma Gandhi says Jesus is the most active person of nonviolence in the history of the world. I love that. It comes from the great Hindu. And then Gandhi goes on and says, and the only people on the whole planet who don't know that Jesus is nonviolent are Christians. There was this great Jesuit theologian who says, it's the only thing you can say for sure about Jesus, that he's nonviolent. That's a powerful statement. If you're a Christian, I invite you to ponder that. If you're going to follow this guy, you can't have anything to do with violence or war. We are people who love one another, love our neighbors, love our enemies, and we give our lives like he did, walking into Jerusalem, committing civil disobedience, getting arrested and tortured and executed by the empire, and rising from the dead and continuing to be nonviolent and saying, peace be with you, now you come and walk the road to peace. That's the Christian story, I find. And so part of my work is trying to invite the churches back to reclaim the nonviolence of Jesus. But there's so much to be done. I think in a nutshell, to kind of look at this question, we all need to really go deep into our personal nonviolence, our contemplative nonviolence, to be with the God of peace. Allow God to disarm our hearts. We all have to become activists of nonviolence. Pick one or two causes and try to get involved in helping the world to become a better place. We all have to be students and teachers of nonviolence, studying how peace and nonviolence works, and then teaching one another, and using this clumsy word, using the language of peace and nonviolence, and saying, how can we create a nonviolent community and a nonviolent society? And we all have to be prophets of nonviolence, that is, to speak out and say no to the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, no to nuclear weapons and greed and violence in all its forms, and yes to justice for the poor and jobs and healthcare and education and food and housing and dignity for every human being on the planet. Yes to the coming of God's reign. That's my hope and prayer for all of us, that we can stay faithful to the journey, that we can reflect on our stories and recommit ourselves to walk the road to peace, to the audacity of peace, and become who we really are called to be, only peaceful people of nonviolence. Thanks very much for listening, everybody, and God bless you all.